So this meeting is being recorded. I want to turn, well, first of all, I want to say I'm Liz. I don't know if I said that. I'm Liz McCluskey, and I, alongside Ann Kester and Ashley Click, am one of the facilitators of this program. And Veronica, who some of you know from her days in DC, has really helped us connect with our wonderful speakers. And Veronica's Dominican sister, Jenny, is going to introduce Andrea Dean, who's our speaker for this evening. So I will turn it over to you, Jenny. And I guess a little word, sorry. If you have questions during her talk, feel free to put them in the chat even before we've opened up for questions. And that's it. Jenny.
Okay. Well, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker this morning, wherever we are in the world, Andrea Dean. Andrea comes to us as a lifelong learner and educator. Ooh, sorry, I'm losing things here. She's taught in primary schools, she's taught in universities. She's more recently been learning herself in the ways of being a spiritual director. She's supported individuals and groups and organisations in their support of learning. She's more recently, for 2 years, was the director of the Office for the Participation of Women in the Church and Office for Lay Pastoral Ministry within the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. Andrea is now president of Women and the Australian Church, otherwise known as WATAC. I've always experienced Andrea as someone who is encouraging, who's faith-filled and hope-filled, and perhaps that's why she's chosen as her topic for today, Woman and Man, One in Christ Jesus. And just as a little addendum to that, she has more recently been a co-convener of the Australasian Catholic Coalition for Church Reform. So Andrea's not prepared to let the church be a place just for men. She's keen for it to be a place for women and men where women can have their full participation too. So thanks, Andrea.
Thank you, Jenny. Let's move to a prayer as we begin. So this simple prayer, could I invite everyone to pray the section which is in bold? Please stay on mute because, you know, several voices don't come over well together on Zoom, but please feel free to pray the section in bold. Is the sharing screen working okay? Okay, great, thank you. So let's just take a deep breath before we pray together. Gracious God, we pray for ourselves and all women as leaders. Give us listening hearts so that your words flow through us as we talk, teach, serve, and lead.
Give us the courage to step outside our plans and programs if you have another path for us to take, as well as the discipline to stay on course in the midst of distraction and interruption.
We pray for the capacity to welcome all people with love and warmth.
Give us the patience, the endurance, and the fortitude.
Keep us healthy, rested, and full of joy from beginning to end. Gracious God, we make this prayer through your Holy Spirit. Amen. Good morning, everybody. I'll just flick my screen around so that I'm a little better organised here. Okay. I've decided to focus my presentation on the relationship between Australian Catholic women as a whole and the Australian Catholic Church, particularly the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference over the past 25 years. So just as we start thinking about the past 25 years, I'm just inviting you to do a little bit of remembering yourselves. So I wonder where you were in 1996. And just a few tips to get you thinking. Braveheart won 5 Academy Awards that year. eBay started its online auction and shopping website. Nelson Mandela stood down as president of South Africa. Dolly the sheep was the first mammal to be successfully cloned. Bill Clinton was re-elected president of the United States. Here in Australia, John Howard's coalition ended 13 years of Labor rule, securing a 45-seat majority in a landslide. So where were you 25 years ago? Just capture that moment. What was going on in your family then? Was anything changing for the women close to you? I'll mention a few world, US and Australian events just for context again. So Mary Robinson had been elected to the office of president in Ireland in 1990, and she was followed by Mary McAleese in 1997. A little earlier than this, but Billie Jean King had threatened to boycott the US Open unless equal prize money was offered to women. Here in Australia, there had been a number of chief ministers and women premiers, Rosemary Follett, Carmen Lawrence and Joan Kirner. In Australia, we'd had a federal Sex Discrimination Act come into law. In the US, Janet Reno had been sworn as the first female Attorney General of the US, and Madeleine Albright was sworn as the first female Secretary of State in the following year. So just capture that, what was going on for the women in your life at that time. And I wonder, what was your experience of church like at that time? I was working in Papua New Guinea then, in the Diocese of Vonimo. I was diocesan director of religious education, and at that time I had a very positive and life-giving experience of church and ministry. Here in Australia, in 1997, Cardinal Clancy launched a research project on the participation of women in the Catholic Church in Australia. Just see if I can find that for you. So this research project, entitled The Participation of Women in the Catholic Church in Australia, was undertaken by the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, by the Bishops' Committee for Justice, Peace and Development, the Australian Catholic University, and the Australian Conference of Leaders of Religious Institutes. The overall aim of the study was to gather data on the participation of women in the Catholic Church in Australia. In order to achieve this aim, the research project addressed 4 key questions concerning various ways in which women participate in the Catholic Church in Australia. The assistance and support currently offered to women to enable their participation, the barriers to women's participation, and the ways in which women's participation could be increased. It was intended that the information obtained would provide a solid basis for theological reflection, pastoral planning, and dialogue with women and women's groups. By April 1999, the report of the project was presented to the plenary meeting of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference. The project attracted an overwhelming response, significantly greater than the response to similar consultations conducted in any time by the Catholic Church in Australia. This was an indication that the issue of the participation of women in the Catholic Church in Australia was crucial and controversial. The research identified two broad approaches to the participation of women in the Catholic Church. One oriented towards maintaining the current participation of women, or even returning to the position of the pre-Vatican II Church, the other seeking an expanded role for women. The dominant issue, no surprise, was gender equality, recognising the equal dignity of women and men created in the image and likeness of God. The Church was seen to be lagging behind the wider Australian society in recognising the changing role of women as one of the signs of the times and affirming the equality of women. The very limited participation of women in decision-making and the need to increase women's involvement in decision-making at all levels were constant and major themes. Involvement in decision-making was often linked with a call to promote opportunities for women to participate in leadership in the Catholic Church. The findings revealed a strong sense of pain and alienation resulting from the Church's stance on women. The research highlighted the enormous contribution of women to all aspects of the life of the Church, except in ordained ministry, leadership, and decision-making. It was perceived that little assistance and support were received from the institutional Church to undertake anything other than ancillary and support roles. Significant barriers to the full participation of women were experienced. The fundamental barrier concerned traditions and attitudes which were seen to be inconsistent with the person and message of Jesus Christ, and especially his relationship with women. The major suggestions to increase women's participation were the involvement of women in decision-making at all levels, a re-examination of the role of the nature of ministry, with exploration of the possibility of more inclusive roles for men and women, and reform of beliefs and associated practices that did not promote the equality of men and women. So that was the research. Then the Australian bishops took some time to ponder the message of the research, and the following year they released their response, and it was the social justice statement for that year with the same title, Woman and Man. The statement, launched by Archbishop Carroll, I'll just give a summary of this on the screen also. The statement described the commitment of the bishops in Australia to the greater participation of women in the Church in Australia in response to the extensive research. The statement held great promise. One of the greatest challenges to emerge from research was the need to create a range of opportunities in the Church for respectful listening and dialogue concerning the experiences, needs, and aspirations of women. And a quote from their response is this: "We would wish to work with all women in the Church and to increase the level of their participation where it is insufficient, because the church needs their gifts in all its life and mission. And the bishops went on to recommend some fantastic things: a better balance of women and men employed by the church and on all their councils, employment policies to promote the equality and dignity of women, research into ecclesiology, ministry, the theology of the human person, study on rituals to be used in the absence of a priest in the prison and hospital apostolates, integrating elements of Indigenous culture into the celebration of the liturgy, use of inclusive language in liturgy, prayer, pastoral and social life of the church, understanding of the canons 766 and 769 concerning lay preaching, implementation of programs of professional preparation and supervision for women and men involved in ministry, promotion and publication of models of best pastoral practice, the theology and practice of collaborative ministry, policies to support those affected by failed marriage or divorce, care of those struggling with the restriction of ordination to males, pastoral statements on sexuality, marriage, and family planning. And then, to enable all that to happen, it was their desire, oh dear, share screen is just not cooperating at the moment. So to enable all that to happen, then there was to be a commission for women who would oversee the implementation of all of these recommendations. They also had some wonderful proposals that were directed at individual bishops and to be implemented at diocesan level. Some of them were similar to the recommendations for the national level, but they picked up on issues like that the role of parish pastoral associate be actively developed and promoted, that priests in their study would learn more about the possibilities for women's participation, that Indigenous women would be included, and so on. There were another 31 recommendations that they planned would be implemented at the local level. Just going to flick to my next slide here. So far we've had the research start in 1997, the research published in 1999, and the bishop's response in the year 2000. So they had a couple of years of doing a little bit of work, and then I guess a bit of bad news started. In 2006, following a restructure of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, there was a change from the commission to the council. So that meant that the Commission for Australian Catholic Women kind of got a demotion. Sonia Wagner, a Good Samaritan sister who was involved at the time, described this change as limiting access to the engine room, and with the lines of communication and accountability becoming somewhat unclear. The Commission had been responsible for reporting directly to the bishops, and now the council's role was to advise one commission. So their impact was filtered down. In 2006 and again in 2014, the bishops changed the mandate of the council to focus only on selected decisions from the social justice statement. In 2018, the council was impacted by further restructuring, and access to the engine room was further reduced, as was the budget. In 2019, the anniversary year of Woman and Man, 20 years, looking again at these decisions unleashed significant disappointment, anger, and frustration amongst Australian Catholic women, especially those who'd participated in the original research. However, despite gradually erosion of the council's role and with minimal resourcing, the Council for Australian Catholic Women was dynamic and strategic. The focus of their strategic plan for that year was still focus on communication and advocacy, theological education and research, and stewardship. The fleshed out strategic plan identified strategic priorities, key strategies, strategic measures, identified council members as champions responsible for progress on particular topics, set timeframes for completion, etc. So at that time, in 2018 and 19, I was director of the Office for the Participation of Women and worked with the Council for Australian Catholic Women. So I know that there were 3 projects that we were particularly proud of. One was a national colloquium for Catholic women, which was held every 3 years. The most recent was held in Adelaide in February 2019, at which Michelle Connolly was a guest speaker. Another project was to establish women's contacts in every diocese and to establish diocesan women's groups in every diocese. And we had a great program called Leadership for Mission, a 2-year postgraduate formation program for women aged 25 to 35. And I can see Natalia present in the group. She was a graduate of that program. And just because I'm particularly proud of that, I'll read a little from our blurb that promoted that program. The Leadership for Mission is a joint initiative of the Council for Australian Catholic Women, the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, Catholic Mission, and the Australian Catholic University. It is designed by women and for women who are inspired by the gospel vision of justice, freedom, and the dignity of the human person. Across a series of educational and formative encounters, this unique program brings the leadership experiences of women within the Church together in the context of academic and collaborative learning environment. Framed by an engagement with Scripture, theology, spirituality, and leadership, this program encourages participants to reflect on their faith in the context of the challenges and opportunities of our contemporary world. In the company of other women, this program invites participants to explore how and in what ways their personal mission and vocation can contribute to a vision of leadership for the Church and society, which promotes equity, equality, and reconciliation. So that same year that I mentioned, 2019, marked 20 years since the research project Woman and Man, and the Council for Women planned a publication called Still Listening to the Spirit, Woman and Man 20 years later. We invited comments from women and men to bring those wonderful recommendations of 20 years ago to the fore. We collected essays from mothers of disabled children, mothers of blended families, religious sisters, Indigenous women, women who'd been abused, canon lawyers, theologians and liturgists, and several more to reflect on progress and the needs of women, as well as the situation of women in ministry. Unfortunately, by the time the book was launched in November 2019, the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference was facing a financial crisis, and several offices and councils were dissolved, including the Office for Women and the Council for Australian Catholic Women. So the last official task for me in my role was the book launch. And once again, I'll read from the media release of that event. To mark the 20th anniversary, various groups agreed to revisit the earlier document and assess what progress had been made. The chairs of these commissions, Archbishop Christopher Prowse and Vincent Long, wrote the foreword to the new publication, Still Listening to the Spirit. A further 20 years down the track, women are still listening to the Spirit and seeking to engage the whole church in a conversation about a more fulsome development of the participation of women in the church for the sake of all of us and for the sake of the reign of God, the bishops wrote. There is unfinished business from the action commitments made by the bishops in 2000. There is also an opportunity to contribute to the communal discernment process of the Plenary Council 2020. This collection of essays engages creatively with both of these elements of the present moment. Each essay contributes to creating a range of opportunities in the church for respectful listening and dialogue concerning the experiences, needs, and aspirations of women. I'll leave it at that. So, just to show you my little depressing timeline again. We had many years of significant progress and then some years of declining empowerment, but still some efforts by the church to really make some change here in Australia. So by the end of 2019, I had lost my job with the church, as did several others. Why do I stay in the church? A church that made me redundant, that failed and betrayed the women of Australia so badly by investing in valuable research, making recommendations, and then gradually reducing resources and undercutting the group responsible for implementing these recommendations. Of course, there's no rational reason to stay with the church after that treatment. Let me just say that I'm enthralled by the song of Jesus. Geoffrey Robinson, a great Australian bishop, used the metaphor of song to speak about the power of the message of Jesus. This is an extract from what he wrote. It explains a little bit of why I stay. Gradually, in little wooden homes and churches across a vast and dry land, the song of Jesus was sung with love and affection. At last, the song came down to me, sung gently and lovingly by my parents. Like so many millions of people before me, I too was captured by the song, and I thought that it was the most beautiful song that I had ever heard. The song must not stop with me, and I, in my turn, must sing it to others in every way I can. I must try to keep my own additions out of the way, and in so far as I can, let people hear the beauty of the original song. In seeking to do this, I remember that this song has two special characteristics. The first is that we sing it badly. Our voices lack strength and go flat. We misunderstand the words. But if we sing this song to the very best of our ability, then people do not hear only our voices behind and before us. They hear the strong and sure voice, the voice of Jesus. The second is that we always sing it better if we can learn to sing it together, not one voice here and another there, each singing different words to different melodies, but all singing the one song in harmony, for it's still the most beautiful song the world has ever known. I hope you understand what I'm trying to convey here. For me, I guess it's not so important as why I stay, but how I stay. And I'll just talk a little bit more about that. So this is some of my strategies for how I've stayed. So one suggestion, find areas of power within traditional religious communities. So during the time I was able to work for the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, my work was largely overlooked, which was a great thing because it gave me space in which to do something. So I was able to facilitate a fantastic leadership program for young women that made a difference in their lives. I still do this of trying to find areas of power to a degree, and I currently work in the Archdiocese of Canberra and Goulburn with the local women's group. We have no practical support from the Archdiocese, but we endeavour to do good for the women of the region. I critique Catholicism. So after developing so many skills and contacts while working for the church in a formal way, I was ideally placed to take up this role. I'm now a member of this group called Women in the Australian Church. We don't spend too much time writing letters, but occasionally we'll challenge a diocese if we unnotice some particular issue. For example, maybe some unsuitable material on a website, and we follow through on critiquing that practice. Our best current action for critiquing Catholicism is a podcast project called Australian Women Preach, running from International Women's Day this year through until the commencement of the Australian Plenary Council. A diverse range of Australian women, including Catholics, simply preach on the gospel for the coming Sunday. The recording or podcast is available on our website, australianwomenpreach.com.au. We also use Zoom for sessions every month, which we call WATAC Presents and WATAC in Dialogue, to make alternative viewpoints available. For example, our last topic was towards an LGBTQI affirming church. Another tactic of mine of how I stay is I expend energy, not so much where I feel it won't make a difference, but maybe in groups that do have an opportunity to make change. And Jenny mentioned those reform groups that I'm involved in, which are currently trying to influence the plenary council process in Australia. I think you must seek alternate sources of nourishment. And so at the local level here in Canberra, I have a small WATAC group where I find nourishment in community, prayer, hospitality, and shared study and reflection. I'm no longer connected to the local parish in any formal way. I think it's good to create an identity as both a feminist and a Catholic. Some people say that it's impossible. And some researchers use terms like separation of those identities or practice spirituality. But for me, I think it's about fostering the inner life, your own spirituality in the midst of the chaotic and patriarchal church. So nourish that inner life. I think multi-generational mentorship is important, both for me as a receiver and a giver. Previously, that was important for me in the Leadership for Mission project. And I think now I receive it and exercise that through WATAC. Do what you can to help others grow. And this is not so important for me now, but I guess channels of dialogue are important. So wherever it's possible, I encourage you to make the effort to share the story, your own story, women's story, because we're still in a situation where men's stories dominate. So that I believe if these more stories are shared, we'll have a more completed story being told, and to pick up on my other metaphor, a more complete song being sung. So that's my story of involvement with the church, why I stay and how I stay. And we're over to questions. I'll just check the chat, and I guess if you'd like to, do I handle the questions or does somebody else moderate this?
So we'll direct the questions to you so you don't
Sure.
have to go back and forth to the chat. And thank you, Andreas, so much for sharing your whole church's experience in Australia and your personal experience, and the how you stay. And I wanted to ask you about these diocesan women's groups, if you could say even a little more about them. Do they, who organizes them? How big is a group, and how involved is the diocesan office in the topics and
Sure.
activities?
So originally the diocesan groups were formed and were inspired by that original research. So they had a bit of a mandate from that research, and I guess they fell away as the support at the national level and at the local level often declined. But a couple of dioceses have been particularly successful. I guess the most successful was the Diocese of Maitland Newcastle. So they have had consistent support from their diocesan office and their bishop. And so they would hold at least some open events for the women of the diocese every year. In Maitland Newcastle, they have a diocesan award, which is given every year to a woman who contributes in a significant way to the life of her parish. So again, they're making sure that women's contributions are noticed and I suppose honoured. They would often have maybe a Women's Spirituality Day where they might have a guest speaker and women attend. And I guess they can, I think they have then a member of their group who contributes to, they don't call it a pastoral council in Maitland Newcastle, but they do have representation on the diocesan pastoral council structure at the local level. Here in Canberra, it really just takes, I suppose, some women of will and spirit to get things started and be prepared to do all the work yourselves without any support. And as long as you don't bump up too much against the traditional structures, I guess you just do what you can, how you can, wherever you can.
Thank you. Yeah, I wondered if they were, I guess in some places, little, almost like a little base community for empowering women, but I'm not sure if that's the form.
Yeah, I guess that's the hope. Yeah, that's the hope. At least they're there as models of strong women engaging with the church and doing what they can to work for change. Yeah.
So if you have a question, feel free to go ahead and unmute and ask it, or if you prefer to put a question in the chat, which Mary Johnston just did. So there's the question here, Andrea, when the bishops made more recent decisions, these ones, the disheartening decisions in recent years, did they give any reasons for the change in policy?
Well, the most recent ones, I guess there's a way of saying things that can make it seem like you're not dissolving things. So if you ask the bishops, did they dissolve the Council for Women? They'd say, no, we merged all the councils. So I guess the practical, the impact was that councils were dissolved, and just the ability of any staff to fulfill any commitments just became impossible. So the real reason behind it was that after the Royal Commission into Institutional Sexual Abuse in Australia, the bishops needed to be seen to be responding to the recommendations of the Royal Commission, and in a great flurry, they started many things, and a lot of those things were necessary to respond to that crisis, but they weren't well costed, and they started initiatives that they couldn't afford. So they were in a financial crisis, and they had to reduce the costs at the national level. And that was really the key reasoning. I mean, if you think, we were doing good work right up until, you know, days of our office being closed. So, yeah, financial reasons were the key to what happened. Natalia, I wonder whether you,
financial reasons.
I'm sorry, Liz, the sound just went funny there for a minute.
So I just wanted to comment that it was supposedly financial reasons given for when the U.S. bishops eliminated the subcommittee on women in church and society. It was all part of this big structuring of the bishops' conference in about 2006, 7, around in there. So it eliminated the word women from their office that's devoted to, like, you know, family life, because it used to be family, women, youth. But they eliminated youth and they eliminated the women's subcommittee. And we were on the verge of developing a resource for women around the spirituality of work. So just went up in a puff. Despite our best efforts to try to appeal the decision. So.
Yeah. So you understand, and you've been there too. Yeah.
It's painful. It's really painful.
Yeah. Liz, I wonder if Natalia, who's here on the call, and she was a young woman who did one of our leadership programs, I wonder if Natalia would like to say anything about that.
Thank you, Andrea. I wanted to honor you for what you are, what you do, everything that you've embodied. An inspiration, especially for me, a new starter, basically, in this journey. I wanted to reiterate the importance of academic learning and the blend with mission. I have gone through the Leadership for Mission program, which is exactly that. And I thought learning theology is one of the most powerful things we could do, because we must speak the language in which the environment we wanted to change, to bring change. And if there are leaderships and structures that are already established on the same words and theology, there is, like what Andrea said, there's another voice missing in the choir. And when we're about to bring that voice out, we must, I think, say it in the language.
I don't know if you can hear us, Natalia, but you got frozen there. There you are.
It can't be done alone. It has to be done together in communities of strong women. And that is, I think, the power of a communal, strong women empowering other women to be strong. So Andrea is one of those women for me. So thank you.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you for that witness. I saw Michelle with your hand up. I don't know if you still had something to say, Michelle Connolly.
Thank you, Andrea. Andrea, I heard you say that you are no longer formally involved with a local parish. And I wondered if you've had any reaction against that. Have you been punished for that in any way, do you think? You know, I mean, for US people, you know, many women in Australia who work in church can feel very obliged to be seen in their local parish, in their local church, especially if you're in employment. Religious sisters, you know, particularly if your community has been associated with a parish. I mean, I live in a parish. You know, we literally are across the fence from the local church plot, which in Australia means presbytery, school and church. You know, we are noticed and remarked upon and looked at askance if, you know, if we're not present at weekend liturgy, for example. So I'm interested to know your experience, Andrea.
Well, I guess being made redundant, you know, set me free from a lot of that. So
Yeah.
I guess I don't have, because I'm not employed by the church. Yeah, so I guess I'm free to do what is nourishing for me. And I guess, so it wasn't nourishing. I mean, I suppose the COVID experience too contributed to me moving out of the orbit of parish and not feeling the need to reconnect in the same way. And to know now that that I suppose many of the liturgies, or if you want a more formal mass, that you can have maybe a more fulfilling experience than your local parish in that way. Yeah, anyway, I'm still, I guess I wouldn't say it's a firm decision. I'd love to experience, you know, that wonderful experience of community that you can at parish. I guess I'm on the fringe of things. So yeah, I'm on the fringe, and I'm not. There's no kind of punishment factor for me, though. Occasionally, I might get a criticism from a priest that I contribute to things maybe at national or diocesan levels, but I don't contribute at parish level. So every now and then I'll get a little criticism, but then, you know, I might get an invitation from a neighbouring parish to, you know, do something with their liturgy committee, and I don't get that at my local parish. So I guess some people are reaching out to me from other parishes, and that doesn't happen at my local parish.
Andrea, in the last 20 years that you've been involved in the way you described, what would you say is the percentage of women, or the numbers of women who have left formal church experiences? You know, is it 10%, 25, 50? Do you have any sense of that?
It's hard to know, Charlotte, isn't it? I guess I could only just say from my own personal experience, and just to say that I think educated women are kind of becoming thinner on the ground, and I do wonder whether some women who kind of have an awakening of consciousness, or a particularly damaging experience, that's just their pathway for exit, because there's often no efforts for reconciliation or inclusion for them. So no, I couldn't give you a figure at all. I don't know whether Michelle or Natalia, but I guess people just know, and you would know yourselves from your own families and friends about the numbers, and even the people who never imagined that they would become disconnected from the church. You know, the faith has been their life, and involvement at local parish has been so important, but they're getting sort of pushed away or disenchanted. So no, I wouldn't hazard a guess, but it's pretty significant.
And do they then form local groups or opportunities kind of outside the quote formal structure to give each other support, do you think?
I don't think many do. I think for many, it's an individual journey of disenchantment, which is a pity.
Yes.
Though I suppose our group like WATAC does provide a home for some people. I guess in Australia, what happened, because, you know, that seemed so promising around the year 2000, particularly religious women who really, I suppose, led some of that push for that research to be done. You know, the women were full of hope. And I suppose it's worse that we had the hope and it's been denied than if nothing happened. So WATAC, I guess, along with the women religious, were very encouraged by that time when the research was done and it looked like things were going to happen. And initially, WATAC associated themselves or identified themselves very strongly with the Catholic Church and for change within the Catholic Church. I think now, as a women's group, we more feel that we should try and be the church that we want to have. So don't ask for permission for things, whatever, that as a group, that we be the church that we want to see. And that's what we're doing. We're not actually having any formal liturgies as such, but I suppose everything else about the community is creating a home for women.
Good.
And yeah, I don't know, Charlotte, do you have any similar stories, or are you finding people do band together a bit?
Yes, I think people do band together. There's a lot of sense of community, even if you're not so physically together. And people give each other a lot of support. And I think maybe Liz or Anne would know more about formal things. I think it's more on the informal level, but also I think, especially after the sexual abuse scandal broke in 2018, most people are just so disgusted, and the lack of real response to that. And I think they're permanently scarred and just feel like the church has failed.
Yes. I guess there's often, like, there's those big picture issues, but I was on retreat with women a while back. There's a local group has started a series of retreats. Liz, you might be interested. They call themselves Women at the Well, and they're offering these retreats as a source of nourishment for other women. But when I listen to their stories, for a lot of them, it's the individual hurt that's occurred at the parish, which often sends them away. And yeah, it's just that one priest and one damaging relationship is, whether it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, I'm not sure, but often that's really significant and painful for them.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlotte, for that. Peggy has a question, and then Nadine after Peggy.
I don't want to minimize the pain that individual women and many, many women have felt over the last 20 years. I've walked with a lot of them and seen a lot of good ones go and become Episcopal priests, some of them. But at any rate, I want to thank you and ask you a question. Thank you for the 25-year timeline. Because I can remember exactly when I got my master's in systematic theology was 25 years ago. And at the time I knew just a couple of nuns, a couple of sisters who were theologians, and we were reading feminist theologians from around the world. But I looked around, I didn't see many women in positions of responsibility. And I just wonder if you made me think about, well, maybe the Spirit, do you think the Spirit's really has moved and is moving despite the lack of help from bishops and I'll just throw out a couple of things. When I think 25 years ago, I think that may have been when we had altar servers by little girls and things. But when you look around in this country, there are women theologians and scripture scholars everywhere. And it's not just that first generation of, tough sisters that, although you're all still there, which is terrific. And we have parish administrators who are women everywhere, that there aren't enough priests. And it makes the priests almost like a little sacrament machine, the women really run and they lead, and that they're the presence of God. And if you look on the parish staff at most, and these are substantive staff who are leading sacramental preparation, spirituality staff, Ignatian spirituality, any kind of that substantive spiritual mission, it's almost all women. The teachers, and I just wonder if the Spirit, do you think the Spirit's we just got to believe, and let God do this? The Spirit will out, for women.
Margaret, I think, that's great, a great reminder. And I guess Anne was saying before that she used to receive the newsletter from our office in Australia. And one thing we used to do in our monthly newsletter was that we would try and share a significant story of a woman in ministry in the church. And, you know, there are women who are, you know, chancellors in dioceses and, you know, as you say, so many women theologians now. It's fantastic. And women still studying theology, you know, often with no hope that they will actually have a job in that area, but they are really captured by it. And unfortunately for us in Australia, there was quite a back down from women leading parishes. So for, you know, certainly at the time of that research, women as pastoral associates was very strong, and women as parish administrators. That did decline a bit. So there was a bit of a move against, I suppose, lay-led liturgies. And I think every diocese in Australia now has brought in overseas priests. So rather than a move towards like lay-led parishes, we've had overseas priests who've come in, and that's worked against the women in parish roles to a degree in Australia. But you're right, in dioceses and universities, we have wonderful women, and I hope most of you heard Michelle's talk. So she's one of our stars. So yeah, I think you are right that despite all of this, we're a little bit like COVID, you know, the infection's getting in there anyway. They could put their masks on, but the infection's spreading. You know, we're infecting the church with something good here. And yeah, we just have to hope that the kind of deep change that's necessary will occur. I noticed that the British women, or the English women, are holding a conference called Root and Branch. And that's a quote from the talk that Mary McAleese gave, you know, talking about the church needed root and branch reform. So it's not just, you know, making space for readers or lectors or whatever, but it's something deeper that needs to happen in order for our church to really change. But thank you, Margaret. It's that's true. It's a heartening thing to remind ourselves of, and to support the women we know of in those roles too, because it can be tough. Even though they are competent and capable, they are in a situation where there is the influence of, you know, a patriarchal mindset. And I'm sure Michelle could tell us stories to make our hair. Mine's already curly, so make my hair go straight. So make your hair go curly.
Thank you.
May I just add something about the decline of lay-led liturgies? That largely, in my understanding, is because it was the women religious who were doing that at that time. And as they have aged, that cohort of people is no longer available. And I think they were a strong presence in really leading that.
Yeah, thanks, Veronica. I think if there'd been even a little bit of a stipend on offer to support lay women, there would have been some lay women who could have stepped up into the role too. But that's true. We did lose a lot of very gifted, capable women from those roles.
Thanks for that reference to Root and Branch. I've been following them as well with great interest. Nadine, you have a really great question. Do you want to unmute and ask it, or you're inviting me to do that? So you know, it's back to like looking for the glimmers of hope, or the church of the future. And what Nadine says is, it sounds like you're living the option that some of us here in the States are thinking about and seeing as we come out of COVID lockdown here. It sounds like you're finding community in a different way. Do you think this is the way of the future for those of us who are willing to stay within or with the church, this model of nourishment that you described?
Nadine, I think everybody's got to find their own pathway. So if you're finding, it sounds like you have a particularly wonderful parish, so certainly don't cut loose if it's nourishing. But I guess if there are people who are in situations where the experience of parish is very barren, you know, look for other options. I was at a meeting with some women in a rural area the other day, and they talked about when COVID started, their own parish was slow to offer any digital options for connection. And they connected with their local Baptist church for a while until there was anything else available. So I guess, you know, if you're thirsty, you know, get the water where you can. You know, I don't want to give up on the church, but just sometimes for your own survival, people have been like very personally damaged, and sometimes they just need to take a break. I didn't ever think that I would say this to people, but, you know, look, if you need to take a break from the church until you heal, maybe that's the best thing to do. Or maybe to do other things in partnership with your involvement with parish, you know, cultivate your own skills of discernment. You know, that we don't have the fullness of the Spirit just within our tradition. You know, we do have access to God's Spirit in other ways and other situations. So Nadine, all the best as you discern the pathway forward. I don't think there's any definitive answer there.
No, I just say something too. I've just been part of the Maitland Newcastle Diocesan Synod. And because of the work of WATAC, I think, among other things, and our participation in that earlier research, there were many more women present at that synod representing their parishes than there were men. And in response to Margaret's point, we had a voting system for each of the 5 areas that were under discussion, and we had red and green cards. Obvious what that means. There were the lowest number for any topic percentage bringing a thing forward was 85%. But the red cards, I'm sad to say, were from the men, oftentimes clergy. So my sense is that the Spirit is truly moving, and the committee that are taking this synodal process forward should have been encouraged, but they've got a lot of work to do to convince some people. But I think the Spirit will have the Spirit's way. I have felt very depressed by church and down, and I stepped away for a while. I found myself a new parish, but I felt inspired by that experience that day. So I'm grateful.
Natalia has found, I'm sorry, yeah, I see Michelle again, and I was just going to ask Natalia if you wanted to share a little bit about the statistics that you were able to find to answer that question that Charlotte had.
Yes, so in front of me, there is a PowerPoint from the Australian Bureau of Statistics provided by Dr. Andrea Dean. There are 2, I wish I could share a screen, but I'll share my image. I'll share an image and you can picture it in your imaginations. There's a decline, sharp decline of the percentage of female population of Catholics from 1996 to 2016. So the graph going like this, red. And another graph is the total populations, and it's green and it's going up. So from 1996, it's 8.9 million, and in 2016, it's 11.8 million. So I think the number of female percentage Catholic actually, when the decline was the population increase, it actually more dire. The situation is more dire than it seems, because it's not it's a continuous decline from 27.5% in 1996, and then down to 27.2% in 2001, and then really gone down. The recent numbers that we have is 23.4% in 2016. And Australian Bureau of Statistics is very neutral about this, but they're just doing a demographic kind of survey. But it's really interesting that the Australian Bishop Catholic Conference acknowledged this, and and it'll be even more interesting to see what they're going to do about it.
Mm.
You, Natalia. So there's a question. Oh, Michelle, I'm sorry, you did have your hand up before, and then there's one more question. I think that might have to wrap up our questions, but go ahead, Michelle, and then we'll ask the last question.
Thank you. It's a question to Jenny. Jenny, I was interested to hear you say that, if I heard you correctly, that the lowest percentage in terms of approving for things was 85%.
Correct.
Yeah, but those who resisted holding up the red cards were male and very often the priests.
Correct.
Now, did the synod and did the priests there, did they recognise that they were that they were constantly against the much stronger position of everybody else? And would you comment at all about, I mean, for example, I happen, because I come from this same diocese, so I do know that, there are very few young men there and very few, like Australian born, that this diocese has imported priests from overseas. So trying to be careful in the way I ask this, but, were there a lot of overseas priests who were holding up red cards? And did the synod, did the group recognise this, and did those priests recognise the pattern?
The priest could not help but recognise, and I have to say, in the group where I was, because we were in hubs, you might have heard that we're about 5 or 6 different hubs across the diocese because of COVID. And certainly in the one where I was, there was a good number of priests, but Australian priests were very definite in their red cards. So they'd have to be most undiscerning not to notice it. And we've had an opportunity to do a survey evaluation of the synod online since then, of that experience. So one hopes that people will have been truly honest in what they experienced. And it was talked about at the morning tea break. It was talked about in the groups that I moved among, and it was at lunchtime too, and people were quite disturbed. But one has to be hopeful. I think that's one thing that Andrea always teaches me, that there's always openness and possibility for transformation, and to have hope that it can happen. But yeah, that was my experience.
So we have just time for, it's a big question, so it's not going to get answered, but of course, a lot of these conversations end up going toward ordination. And so Mary asked the question, or made the comment, that the lack of celibate male priestly vocations may be the working of the Spirit, while many women feel the call and would be willing to say yes. So that was her comment. I'm going to tack on something, which is Jenny talking about the synod process. So Pope Francis has ignited this synod process so that the people of God can be consulted about things, and we can maybe we can be cynical because Andrea, this is what happened, and then 20 years passed, but I still feel hopeful about it, that there is a potential for voices to be heard, and on the subject of ordination, and specifically about the diaconate, since that's a live issue right now with a commission and with Pope Francis revisiting it. So maybe there's a little hope, and I don't know if you want the final word on that, Andrea, before we close.
Look, the Spirit is very powerful, and I love the fact that Francis is committed to this vision of synodality. I mean, he could say, let's ordain women tomorrow, but they'd be, that necessarily wouldn't change the church. So I think synodality is an attempt to, I suppose, have change seep through the church and bring everybody on the journey. And unfortunately, it's a slow journey, but I guess it's the way that will bring the whole church to renewal. So yeah, I do agree. We have to trust in the Spirit, and we have to support this vision of synodality. And yeah, unfortunately, maybe it's worse for us who are kind of in the developed world. We were ready for these changes 20 and 25 years ago, so it seems unbearably slow to us. But yeah, we do have to hope that this significant renewal in the church is possible. And I think it is more than, you know, if we did say, you know, ordain women tomorrow, we wouldn't necessarily have a better church. It's something, you know, a deep renewal. This root and branch symbol, I think, really captures it for me, that it is more than just ordination, but it's because ordination in the Catholic Church is related to this decision-making, leadership and ministry. If those things could be loosened up in other ways, we would be able to have some more evolution of change and renewal.
May I just ask, say one thing, or ask? When you asked us to go back to our experience of 1996 and so forth through the years, I often think about what's happening in civil society in Australia and probably in the United States. The gender pay gap is still there. The glass ceiling is still there. There are elements of the church that are reflected in the surrounding societies in which we live. So that's the mindset that is in the community anyway. It's not like the church is, well, it is worse perhaps, but it's not non-existent around us in the community, which is sad.
Veronica, I guess the church should be better than society,
Yes.
shouldn't it?
Yes, yes.
You hope. So as Andrea says, keep listening to the song of Jesus and be touched by that. And so I want to close us by first, I'm going to invite you to next week, and then thank you, Andrea, but I would like to invite you to come listen to Maeve Haney, who puts a lot of this plunging into women's experience and scripture into song. And we've heard one of her songs before when Sandra Schneider's came. She wrote a song for Sandra. And so I hope we'll hear some of her song, and she'll encourage us to keep listening to that song, Andrea. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your experience and the reality of change and how slow it is. And I'm encouraged because of knowing every effort that's being made in Australia. And I really do. I don't know who said it, but we come together. There's some kind of power in that, power of the Spirit. So I appreciate coming early in your morning, and the rest of us in our evening. See you next week. Thank you for coming through, Jenny and Michelle and Natalia.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hope to see you next week.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Bless you.